Hello and welcome to episode 5, season 3 of the Experience Lounge podcast. We have, I think, quite a topical subject at the moment that we're covering in today's episode. And it's a bit of a build, I think, from an episode that we did a couple of weeks ago around the Great Resignation. So we're going to be talking a bit today about the 4-day work week and the movement towards an output orientated working culture. And I think, as we said, it really is that build in terms of what people want from work, what purposeful work means for them. And we'll include a bit of external research and those links obviously always in the show notes that we do. And then just, I think, our views on how EX practitioners can sort of lead the way here and sort of lean in, and some of our sort of thoughts on the overall topic. But before we get into that, Sasha, how's your week been?
Good, thanks. I am solo this week. My husband has gone back to somewhat normal business travel, which is lovely to say, but also really unfamiliar. He is down in Australia for a week, which is great for him and his team. So yeah, I'm just making the most of all this time on my own. So I've caught up on Love is Blind. I know you've still got an episode left on that, so I won't spoil that for you. But if anyone is listening or watching the podcast and is a Love is Blind fan, feel free to
You're our people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
You are our people. So I love that. And I've watched both Love is Blind Japan and Love is Blind the US version. So loved them all. Perfect binge watching material. So yeah, no, things are good. On the work front, busy. I'm working on lots of things at the moment. Small things, but good things. And so it's quite a mental exercise to kind of keep up with everything that's going on, because clients are all focusing on different things, which is always a good thing and keeps it fresh and nice and exciting. So yeah, all good from me. What about you, Laura? How are you doing? How is the house? Any house updates? Any Tesla updates?
No Tesla updates. I think they did a software one a few weeks ago, actually, but nothing like the light show at Christmas, which was probably a little bit disappointing. On the house, just waiting. I think, from what I've heard, it's very common in the UK for solicitors just to take a long time with the house purchase. And there is a little bit of me that doesn't, especially with my kind of experienced continuous improvement hat on, doesn't quite understand why everything needs to be sent in the post, given that it is 2022. But alas, that is some of the thinking.
We have a guest. We have an impromptu guest on the podcast. I love it.
We do have a guest.
We keep rolling.
We do. It was that thing of, I don't know. Do you remember the BBC? This was like pre-COVID, where there was that guy. I think he was in Korea, maybe, or Japan, being interviewed, and then his kid came behind, and it was that classic thing just then where I saw the door open ajar, and I was like, is he going to come in? Because I've generally said to my family that working from home is so normalized now that you can obviously just come in, except I've said if I'm doing like a panel event or, something a bit like the podcast. But anyway, that was my husband, for those that are observant and saw him just walk in and grab my mother-in-law's handbag. So,
well, lovely. Thank you for clarifying that it was your mother-in-law's handbag. I mean, we just wanted to get that right for the podcast.
People needed to know that. Exactly. I felt like we dealt with that really well. Just keep going. Because it is a part of life. Anyway, so before we get into the topic of the 4-day work week, we've got some overall HR news. Sasha, I think you were going to share a couple of items in that.
So slightly different to our normal HR Tech News segment, what I wanted to do this week was kind of highlight 2 or 3 really good articles that I think our listeners would really like. So as Laura said, we'll just leave everything in the description and in the show notes. So if you want to go and access the articles I'll reference, please do. But these are ones that I've just been perusing this week, ones I think are quite interesting and relevant to the topics of conversation we've been having so far this season. So a couple to call out here. So first is why flexible working is essential to your diversity, equity and inclusion strategy. Really topical. We've got International Women's Day coming up, which we will have a dedicated episode on. Of course, we will. It also marks 1 year of our podcast.
And it's our birthday.
Yeah,
yes,
exactly. So we need to have a proper celebration for that. Maybe we could get matching party hats.
We've talked about getting merch for a while, so I think what's the date now? I think there's still time to order matching like t-shirts or something. Yours to Singapore, mine to the UK, and we can with our party hats. Exactly.
Maybe we could get one of those, the foil ones. Foil balloons.
Oh, I love those. Yeah,
that would be really good fun. Anyway,
can get myself down to Morrison's.
Exactly, we digress. Right, so why flexible working is essential to your DEI strategy. This is a Harvard Business Review article, so definitely we'll be linking that. Super relevant. Another one which I actually think we shared this on our Instagram page. If you're not following us, let me do that again. If you're not following us on Instagram, what are you doing? We share these articles all the time, so make sure you head over to our Instagram page at the Experience Lounge Podcast to follow us. But this one we linked a few weeks ago, and it's called In a Hybrid World, Your Tech Defines Employee Experience. So again, really just the perfect article for this podcast. So if you're in EX or the HR tech space, that one is for you. And then the last one, which we've spoken about a lot and actually is really relevant for the points I will raise during this episode, is don't ignore the deskless workforce. Now, this is an old article, but one I think is still really relevant, because I think so often we forget that we are also looking at a global workforce where only 20% are desk-based employees. We still have a huge proportion of employees outside of that. And this article talks about how a lot of the Silicon Valley investment, only 1% of it, focuses on deskless technologies. So 1% of software investments, deskless technologies. And that is amazing considering that 80% representation. So I will link all three of those. So hopefully that's a nice alternative to the HR Tech News segment and some useful reading for you all if you've got nothing else to do on this fine end of February week.
Yes. I was thinking actually, maybe we could do a bit of a poll on both Instagram and LinkedIn if people would be interested in maybe more of a regular slot on articles we're reading or books we've got on the go at the moment, and we could see if that would be of interest to people, because we are always reading around the topic and have some, I think, interesting leadership books. Like I'm reading Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown at the moment, which I'm really enjoying. I just love I love her voice, like the way she narrates it, because I'm listening to it on Audible. So yeah, maybe we do that. We can do a poll and see if that would be of interest. Anyway, getting into the topic of the 4-day work week, I think firstly to start with, just to set a little bit of background actually. So Sasha, what is it, the 4-day work week?
So I don't want to pin it on one organisation, but there is one organisation that has been behind this, fourdayworkweek.com. And really it's a movement towards working 4 days a week instead of 5. And there are two, and correct me if I'm wrong here, there are two kind of variances here. One is 4 days a week, same hours each day, so like 8 hours a day. The other is 4 days a week, condensed 5, so 5 into 4. And that tends to be where most of the discussion is had, right? And so, Eve, I feel like we've been talking about this for a while, like a few years, but it's kind of started to gain momentum again with the Great Resignation, hybrid working, future of work, going back to the workplace. And so lots of organizations and countries globally are now looking at making this part of employment legislation and their employee value proposition. So that's kind of what it is. Have I missed something?
I think the other piece in terms of maybe where it's gaining a lot of traction is, and it's run like the organisation that you said, the 4-day week global, but they're doing a pilot, which particularly in the UK press, I think is where in the last maybe month or so, this really started to get traction. And then you had a number of different outlets as well that have then picked that up. So we will link, as we always do, some of the articles that we've read, but there was a recent Forbes one that highlighted it's sort of cross industry, but also I think a number of countries as well. So you've got countries like Scotland, Spain, Japan, Iceland, to name but a few, who are starting to trial that 4-day work week. And Belgium was the most recent one, I think, that I read to adopt the practice, but that was going to be, like you said, the kind of condensing the current 5-day week into 4 days. And so almost if you're, and this is where I think it gets challenging too, right? Because across different markets, there's typically a different number of days, hours, sorry, that you would work. And I think back even to my time in Hong Kong and Singapore, and the work week there being 40 hours, whereas when you then come back to the UK, it's 35. And then this Belgium example, it's actually then 38. So it's just interesting when you're thinking about the compression of some of those days, actually what that means. And the other bit that I read that just really resonated with me was the piece around typically the sort of structure that we have around days of the week that we work, the concept of a weekend, the number of hours that employees would typically work is very, very old in terms of its sort of thinking. I think it was sort of post-industrial revolution that this kind of came about, that was kind of the way in which organizations would set up that working week. So it does feel like it's time for a bit of a refresh, I think, actually, and that's sort of been some of the sentiment, and why we said it was a build on our topic, I think, around the Great Resignation, is also because a lot of the articles that we've read again are highlighting that employees are starting to think differently about work. They're starting to think differently about how and where they want to work, what it means to have purposeful work, that balance of home and personal life and work. And this is, I think, one sort of concept that's then being talked about quite a bit in the media then, in terms of how organizations could adapt it, and also how do you help to still drive the right business outcomes in terms of people's productivity. And I think it kind of links in, doesn't it, to that sort of challenge around how do we make hybrid working work. So yeah, it's a super, super interesting topic, I think, and lots of examples actually. When you start, like, I quite enjoyed pulling together some of the sort of show notes for this topic, just because when you start to then read quite a few articles, you're seeing that there's different takes on it, like we said, around whether it's actually working less days or trying to reduce the number of hours across a certain number of days. And then just where we've had some really successful, I think, examples that have happened so far. So there's an example with Unilever where they've run a trial in New Zealand, and I think there was one talked about quite a lot with them in Japan, with Panasonic wanting to offer a 4-day work week as well. And then one of the ones that is very, very sort of pertinent here in the UK, just because again it's hospitality industry, is the Landmark Hotel in London is sort of leading the way with, that sort of first wave of 4-day weeks within hospitality. So yeah, big, I think a big disruption, right, in terms of both industry and geography, depending on sort of where you might be located.
Yeah, definitely. And I think in addition to all of the amazing research that you did for the episode, and I remember seeing you sending through the episode show notes, and I was so excited to see this episode on there. Like, I can't believe we haven't covered it sooner, to be honest with you. So I'm so happy we're discussing this. But we also put a poll out on LinkedIn. So
yes, you did.
We got 143 votes on this poll, and quite a bit of discussion in the comments as well. So I will link this post in the show notes as well if you're interested to see what people say. But 66% said that the 4-day work week was the future of work. 1% said nope, 5 days is better. And this is just an appeal. If this was you, if someone listening voted for that, please feel free to reach out to us for help. Blink twice for help. We hope you're okay. And 6% said it's a passing trend. And 27% said 5 days, but flexible. So overwhelming majority, therefore, it's the future of work. So lots of people getting behind this, and actually people in the comments talking about how they're kind of adopting this work structure already, but using that 5th day as their creative day and their kind of breathing day to get through stuff that isn't calls, which I think is quite common now anyway. So yeah, super exciting topic. And yeah, great to see it getting some traction.
Agree. I think my own personal take on it, or even actually how I'm working flexibly at the moment, is I've had this arrangement for a while. So actually, since I came back from maternity leave, where I work 9 days in 10, and that's kind of the similar of
Mm.
um, kind of trying to get your 5 days into four, but it's, instead of it being four, it's 9 across 10 days, if that makes sense. And I
Mm.
find, I mean, a lot of the research that I've read around people feeling like that extra day allows you to do something that will fill you up in a different way. So whether that's getting your exercise class in, or seeing family, or whatever it is, I find the same thing, that day I'm still contactable on emails. I'll still sort of reply to stuff here and there, but I'm
Mm.
not kind of sat at my desk on that day. And it's great for being able to have a bit of me time, spend time with my son. And I do find on the Monday, which is actually today, after the Friday that I've had one of those, I feel so much more energized and sort of ready to take on that week.
Yeah.
And so I would sort of say I'm a big advocate, I think, personally, for this sort of way of working. But I also would maybe agree with that smaller percentage that you mentioned, where they'd said the flexibility, because I sort of find myself that I then might do a few hours here and there on a different day, but I think that's
Mm.
the sort of full definition of flex, right?
Yeah. So I'm on. I'm bought into your view on this, right? I definitely see all of the benefits of the 4-day work week. However, contrasting opinion here. I feel like, are we, and this is a question, are we replacing the 5-day work week with the 4-day work week without really thinking about what we're trying to get rid of? And like, when I've spent a bit of time looking at the benefits of the 4-day work week, a lot of it is about enabling employees to take back control of their time and how they
Yeah,
work, and
that's
to
it.
empower them to, enjoy their pursuits and not be tied to their desk 5 days a week. And actually, I think, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong here, isn't it like a Henry Ford thing that mandated the
Yeah.
5-day work
Yeah,
week?
yeah,
Like, and it
that's what
was
I mean. It
built
was like the
around
post.
men.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was built around men. It was in that era of of sort of factory working post
Mm.
the industrial revolution. I had to pause to say that
Mm.
because the first time I said it, it was hard to say. But yeah, so it's a very outdated concept, right? So I agree with you.
Mm.
I think there's a piece here around people saying the 4-day week, but I actually think what it is, which is why it does link so much to previous episodes that we've talked about around hybrid working and the Great Resignation, is it's more about employees saying, I want more control over how I manage my
100%.
time effectively. I think if you sort of, if you kind of dig a little bit into what the crux of it is, I think it's that, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's what I can get behind. I think this is a great movement though, because movements,
Yeah, I agree.
they get conversation going, they actually drive change, this is really great. But what I would be hesitant, if I were a CHRO, for example, which I'm not, but if I were a CHRO, I would probably look at how do we enable flexibility rather than come out with a new mandate that says we're going to 4 days, because there are people that won't work for. And also,
No.
I think, we're kind of moving into topic 2, which is why it's important from an EX perspective. But also, we need to think about what are the costs of us doing that, especially if it's a condensed week, right? Because
Yeah.
that might put a lot of pressure on people. I know that not all of the case studies that are available online of people trialing this show that 100% of employees are happy with that.
Mm.
Is there a mental health burden on people if they have to work 5 days in 4? What are some of
Yeah.
those costs? Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also, when you sort of get into the practical, like how does this roll out in practice, it also then becomes quite challenging, I think, for different groups, because you then have to work through how do you cover the days, because not everyone can have the same 4 days. And so
Mm.
there'd obviously, I think, be preferences for people to have the Friday or the Monday, because that makes it like a long weekend. But that's not realistic if you're trying to run a business where you're going to
Mm.
need cover on those different days. So yeah, it does, I think, raise some interesting challenges for organizations in terms of how they implement this. And I do think I think the sort of pilot was meant to be going live around June time with the 4-day week global organisation. So it'll be interesting after that's kind of gone through, what are some of the learnings? Because there's a lot of research quoted around actually increases to productivity, because there is that option for people to kind of have more flexibility around how they spend their time on that other day. But like you say, what are the trade-offs in terms of, number of hours, like mental load burnout, particularly when we think the pandemic showed us that from a well-being perspective, people really liked the flexibility to manage their day around different activities or care and responsibilities or whatever. But then actually on the flip side, people were online longer. So there's more to it.
Yeah,
I think it's definitely nuanced for sure. So
absolutely. And I think just quickly, one extra point, and this has just come to mind, right? And this is completely unsubstantiated, but just a consideration. If people move to a 4-day work week, there's always going to be that labor gap, even if it's just temporarily, right? So for example, if you look at the retail environment, you got, let's say, some people moving to 4 days, there'll still be the need to cover that 5th day, because we're not going to transform overnight the kind of expectation that people receive service in a shop, let's say from Monday through to Sunday. And so I wonder if there's a thing around, diversity, equity, and inclusion here, because it will be those that really need to work and to pick up the extra hours for extra pay that will take the brunt of the rest of the world, who have the privilege of doing so, moving to a 4-day work week. And again, that's entirely unsubstantiated. It's kind of like one of those things that has come to mind. But do you see what I mean? That also is a consideration.
Yeah, agree. And I think it does, like we said, it will depend a bit on what industry you're in. And I think some of those, sort of service industries, potentially harder to do. But then that's why I think the Landmark Hotel example is such an interesting one, because I was reading a bit more about that case study, and the way they're sort of setting up the chef's working pattern is that they'll do 4 days, but then it is that thing of you've got to kind of organise the 4 days and they'll have to rotate them and all of that. So it is going to be something that if organisations are looking to implement this, it will require, I think, a lot of planning and sort of listening to employees, which leads us quite nicely into what can EX practitioners do to support this change, or sort of why is it important from an EX perspective?
So if you're a long-time podcast listener, you know what I'm going to say. And the first thing is employee listening. Get out and talk to people about it. And I also think, don't be afraid to go and talk about it. Like, just because you raise the topic doesn't mean necessarily you're going to roll it out. And I know that there's often that hearsay in organizations, HR said this, it's definitely coming in, it's coming in 6 months' time. But I think get out and have the conversation, even if it's just kind of those exploratory discovery conversations, and see what people think. Survey people, go and do some focus groups, maybe ask people that themselves are like you, Laura, have gone from 5 to 4 or 10 to 9, whatever it is, people that have adjusted their hours to work flexibly. And because I think they'd be a really insightful group to talk to. So I definitely think employee listening is one. And I also think, tied to that, and this is very similar to the Great Resignation topic, is concept socialization with your leadership team. Because I think you're always going to come up against people that will ask, what's the proof around productivity? What are the hard numbers? Especially if you're in the room with like your CFO, like those questions are definitely going to start coming up. And so I think the earlier you can socialize the concept, maybe not as the mandate of a 4-day work week, but kind of introduce this to the leadership team and float this about there as kind of the same topic as the Great Resignation. This is something that people are talking about. This might become something we have to consider from a competitive advantage perspective. What do we think? What does this mean to us as an organization? So that's what I would say. What do you think?
I think there's definitely a piece here, though, where I do think it can really link to your EVP. And so one of the bits of sort of advice I would give, or thinking when you're trying to look at how you implement this change, if it's something that you were sort of thinking of doing, is how could it then be a differentiator to retain and attract talent, and arguably is something that, yes, would require, I think, a lot of logistical planning, because it needs to, you sort of need to set some of the parameters for working hours. You've got to think about coverage across different functions or teams and staggering the off days. But actually, it isn't something that would cost, I don't think, that much to implement, but could be a massive selling point from a sort of retention and attraction perspective, providing, to your point, that is what employees are looking for. And I think that's maybe getting to the crux of it, because I suspect there may also be, as we sort of talked about previously, that it's about employees wanting more flexibility. So it could be, is that sort of the, almost like the poster campaign is under the 4-day week, but actually it's more about, I want the flexibility to be able to manage my working week, my my days the way that I need to around my work deliverables, but also any sort of caring responsibilities or personal things that I might want to be doing. So I think the EVP piece, though, could be a real differentiator if it is something that your organizations, your sort of employees are saying that that's what they definitely want.
Yeah,
what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's an opportunity for organizations to step out and kind of lead the pack, almost, potentially. And I think, as you say, if you're struggling to find people, if you're struggling with attrition, like, this might be a good thing for you. And of course, it goes hand in hand with the employee listening as well. And I say that because, again, similar theme to what we raised in the Great Resignation episode, you don't want to throw this out there if actually, like, the primary employee challenge is that people don't feel they're paid well enough, or if people don't have the tools and equipment to be successful 5 days a week working remotely versus 4 days a week. Do you know what I mean? Otherwise, then it's like another bandage over the open wound. So I definitely think that's why that employee listening is so important. I also think there are practical elements that you need to think about. So if you're an organization thinking about implementing this, it is looking at the impact on your customers. It is looking at the impact on rotas potentially within your team. Like, do you have I don't know, software or a platform to manage that at the moment? How will you manage the team coverage? Like, what is the contingency planning as well? Like, what happens if there's a major outage in your technology team, or we have a project deadline? I almost think you'd end up having to create a charter for all the exceptional circumstances where the organization would command people to come back 5 days, because we still run projects, or will we? Who knows? Will you change it so that your projects run on a 4-day week schedule? Who knows? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you start to unpack it. There is definitely a lot that would need to be worked through. And I think when you're sort of reading some of that external research and the various articles online, that's the bit that I don't think has probably been documented that much, because it still needs to play out. I also think from an EX perspective, with something like moving to that 4-day work week, I think that's where your measurement and your sort of EXI, so your employee experience index, is going to be so key as a way to measure. I think the piece up front that we've talked about in terms of, is this even something that employees want? But then right through to, if it is something that you implement, how do you kind of measure those key touch points? Because like we said, there could be things like the first time somebody in the team goes off sick, like how do you manage that structure compared to perhaps when you have a different kind of coverage model? So I think that sort of continuous measurement as well, and pulsing people throughout that sort of journey in terms of when they're working across that 4-day week would be really, really important from an EX perspective, I think, as well.
Yeah, definitely. Couldn't agree more.
Cool.
But I do think overall, love this movement. Think it's necessary, but I think I'm pro flexibility. Instead of the 4-day week, the your day week.
I like that.
Heard
Very
it here
good.
first. Yeah. Any
Heard it on the
organisations,
Experience Lounge first.
if you hear
Boom.
it, I'm a solo consultant. I will be coming after you for copyright.
Yeah.
I will expect payment. So
Yes. Love it. On that note then, I think that brings us to the end of the episode. So we will, as we always do, but link all of the relevant articles that we've referenced throughout the episode in the show notes. Really keen, I think, to continue the conversation on this one. So if you've got a point of view, do drop us a DM either on LinkedIn or also on Instagram, because we're now active on both, we might have said, at the Experience Lounge podcast. And do on your podcasting apps that you would normally access your podcasts on, or on YouTube, do like, rate, subscribe, and we're really keen to sort of get everybody's feedback. So thank you for listening. Hope you'll have a lovely week, and we will speak to you soon. Take care.
bye.
Bye.